My dear mate Don Levy Fitzpatrick, who sadly died a number of years ago, was the king of St Kilda. He did some wonderful developments. He hadn't started off, I think he'd started off as an engineer, but he hadn't started off as a restaurateur, but he sort of got into the business and he started the Dogs Bar, which I suppose was the first of the wine bars. And I think I had a little to do with the changes in St Kilda too, but not to the extent of Don, because he then went on to the George and redeveloped the hotel, that and the Sea View, opened a number of restaurants. But this recipe, see, I'm digressing now. That doesn't sound like me, does it? Anyway, this recipe is from his original venture into the hospitality industry, and it's because he had a property in Middle Park and he was trying to let it. In fact, I rang him to talk to him about it, not knowing him, but just rang him. And anyway, he couldn't get anyone that wanted to take it on, so he said, "Oh, bugger it, I'll do it myself." So he opened Donlevy's, and he had a couple of very fine chefs called Paul Strawbridge and Gary Sweetman, who were there for a period. And this is sort of a recipe of theirs. And when I say sort of, I really mean sort of. But Don always ran good operations, and Donlevy's was no exception. It was a terrific restaurant. Anyway, this is a lovely beef noodle dish, Indonesian in flavour. And as I said, it's sort of like their one. I've changed it a bit. Says he, I've changed it a lot. Of course I have. I can't help myself. But we're making a marinade to start off with. And this marinade's got a bit of oomph to it, I suppose you'd say. Start off with half an onion, decent sized onion, just cut fairly roughly. And we're going to process it. And a decent piece of ginger, 2 or 3 cloves of garlic. And we will just whiz that up. I used to always have this dish every time I went there, and I really did like it. And I remember I asked Gary for the recipe once, and he told me to F off. But anyway, he was a good cook. He was a good cook. Didn't like giving out his recipes though. And we'll whiz it up. Now, what we then add to that is half a cup, which gives the Indonesian feel to it, half a cup of the Indonesian sweet soy, which is called ketchup manis. So you can get that at any Asian grocery. 1 tablespoon of, a good tablespoon of chili paste, the sambal olik in this case. I just add a little bit more. I like it to have a bit of a kick. It's up to you guys, as much or as little as you like. And then we'll just whiz that up again. All right, that's looking pretty good. And what I've got here is about a 300 gram, because I'm doing enough for 2, 300 gram of well-trimmed fillet steak. I like something really tender. Of course you could use porterhouse or rump, but I like something really tender for this. So I go all out and use fillet, as they did at Donlevy's, to be honest. And we just slice that into even nice pieces, fairly small. They always did some chicken in it too. I don't think it needs it. I actually like the idea of just beef, to be honest, but you could, if you wanted to, you do some chicken breast in it as well. But I thought that was a bit over the top. I'm getting a bit excited. Let's get this out. Make sure you get all the marinade out. It's a shame to waste any of it, because we do use the marinade as the sauce later on too. Well, as part of the sauce, I should say. Mix that up really well. What I will add is some pepper. I won't add salt at this stage, because you've got those sauces, you know, the sambal and the ketchup manis, and I'd say the ketchup manis has got plenty of salt, but I will mix that up really well, just to separate that beef. And I'll then put that in the fridge, and I'll leave that for about 3 hours. You could leave it overnight. I think overnight is a bit of a worry, even though when I eventually got the recipe from Gary, he said overnight, but I think the overnight, you don't really get the taste in the beef, you know, because the marinade just takes over, doesn't it? So, to me, 3 hours will be plenty. Then we'll come back and we'll finish it off. All right, guys, I've marinated it for 3 hours, turned it a few times, and I've now strained that beef. And we just throw it into a fairly hot wok. I'm just going to seal this, and then I'm going to pull it out and start the veggie. Don't overcook it at this stage, because you want it to be nice and tender, don't you? Just make sure you separate it so that you haven't got a big lump of beef. I remember, I have to tell you this story. There was a restaurant in Palmerston North in New Zealand called the Hong Kong. And everyone used to rave about it because the portions were so big. Anyway, I went there once on the recommendation of my mother's hairdresser. I'm talking about the 60s, guys, so it's a long time ago. Why would you go on a recommendation of a hairdresser? But anyway, my mother's hairdresser, she wasn't very good. Now we pull that out. Anyway, the point of the story is that I went on her recommendation, and yes, the portions were huge. You should have seen them. But in my chicken chow mein, because that's the kind of food it was, I had some seafood, I had some beef, I had a whole lot of different bits and pieces. Anyway, when the health inspector came to check, I wonder who dobbed them in. Wouldn't have been me, would it? It was me, actually. They found that what they were doing was they were just, the food that was coming back from the last table went onto the next table. Anything that was left over on the plate went onto the next table. Oh, my mother. She did not go to a Chinese restaurant again until she came to Melbourne, and I took her to the Flower Drum, which of course was Gilbert Lau's province, and he was the man, and he looked after her like she was one of the family. So she had the most wonderful time. She loved it. But she was not interested in going anywhere in New Zealand at that stage, or in Palmerston North anyway. So I've sealed that beef, and what I've now done is I've added some red onion, which I've cut into fairly fine wedges, and some red and yellow capsicum, which I've cut into strips, seeded and corded. All right, that's starting to get a bit of colour, you can see that, which is nice. Just a bit of char. You know, when the Chinese call it the breath of the wok. Now, I don't have that kind of power in my stove, you know, like they have at about 7,000 miles an hour, but I can still get a bit of the breath of the wok in here, as long as your smoke alarm's turned off. And then we put that marinade that is left over in there, which is going to be pretty strong. So what we need to do is add some chicken stock. Just some packet chicken stock's fine. Quarter to half cup, something like that. I've also got some oyster sauce here, just in case I need to add a little bit of extra flavour. You know, because when I put the beef in the marinade, it may have, you know, sort of watered it down a bit. And I don't want to put any more ketchup madness because it's a bit strong. So we've already got that in the beef, so I don't want to put that. So I may put a little bit of oyster sauce, but we'll see how we go. So we're just going to reduce that. While that's happening, I'll start thinking about my noodles. Now, if you're watching, Gary, I know you used cellophane noodles. I'm using Hokkien because I love them, but you could, of course, could use cellophane noodles, but today it's Hokkien, and I'm just going to put those into some boiling water, and I'm basically going to turn that water off any second. So we'll just sort of let them almost cook themselves. Let's have a taste of this sauce before I start putting the beef back in. Oh, that's all. I don't think I'd put anything else in there. A little bit more stock. Spring onions, 3, I suppose. Some chopped coriander, not too much, guys. Can take over, I love it. I mean, I'd put 3 tons in if it was just for me, but it's not. The beef can go back in. You can always add a little bit more stock if you feel that it's a bit thick. There's baby spinach, you know, the washed stuff that you get in a packet, which is always nice. Noodles, which only need to be blanched, which they have been. Now, if this is a portion for 2, I do hope you're hungry, because I think I've got a bit excited. I think I've got very excited. Well, it looks good, guys. It really does, doesn't it? Well, I reckon today I've done a dish for 4. I'm sorry, guys. It started off was going to be for 2, and I got a bit excited. But I reckon that looks pretty darn good. Coriander sprigs on the top. Hard-boiled egg. You can do more than a couple if you like. A couple of wedges of lime. And there we have, I think that's a ripper dish. I'm as biased as heck. This is, if you like, some chilies on top, but that's up to you. And what we've got here is this wonderful, I'm really impressed by this. This is from the Yarra Valley, and it's Fawcett Pinot Noir, and it's come from my dear new mates, Sasha and his wife, from Cellar d'Or, and it's spelled D''O''R. I thought that it would be Cellar d'Or, but they tell me it's just a tricky thing. It's Cellar d'Or. Now that Pinot is their recommendation to go with this, and as usual, I think they've done a bloody wonderful job, because I think that will perfectly match those bold Indonesian flavours. All right, guys, enjoy that. I think it's a ripper dish. And as I said, I got a bit excited with the quantity. So you'll have to invite 2 mates over, won't you? Or 3 mates.